Hello listeners, this video discusses V.S. Naipaul's A House for Mr. Biswas. His full name is Sir Vidyadhar Suraj Prasad Naipaul, was born in 1932 and died in 2018. He was a Trinidadian-born British writer. Trinidadian is a place, it's a country in Caribbean. He writes fiction and non-fiction in English. Most of his novels are set in Trinidad. His breakthrough novels are A House for Mr. Biswas, 1961. His novel In a Free State gave him Booker Prize in 1971. His other notable works include A Bend in the River, 1979, The Enigma of Arrival, 1987, and he is the recipient of Booker Prize 1971, Jerusalem Prize 1983, Knight Bachelor 1990, Nobel Prize in Literature 2001. The novel A House for Mr. Biswas is a 1961 novel. This was the first Naipaul's novel to give him acclaim worldwide. The Modern Library in 1998 ranked the novel A House for Mr. Biswas in their number 72 on their list of the 100 best English language novels of the 20th century. Time magazine included this novel in their list of 100 best English novels from 1923 to 2005. In 2022, the novel was included on the Big Jubilee Read list of 70 books by Commonwealth authors. Also, it was selected to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee of Elizabeth II. Let us see the characters of this novel. Mr. Biswas, he is the novel's protagonist. His full name is Mohun Biswas. He is a clinical Indo-Trinidadian man. He spends his whole life in pursuing a house of his own. Shama is Mr. Biswas' wife, who is one of Mrs. Tulsi's 14 daughters and the mother of Savi, Anand, Maina and Kamla. Savi is Mr. Biswas' elder daughter, whom Biswas intended to name Sarojini Lakshmi Kamala Devi. Anand is the second child of Biswas and Shama. Anand and Savi have 3 years difference. Mrs. Tulsi is an authoritative and stoic matriarch. Mr. Tulsi coordinates with Dr. Biswas' family to get their daughter Shama in marriage. Owad is Mrs. Tulsi's younger son. Bipti is Mr. Biswas' selfless mother. She suffers immensely and a sensible personality throughout the book. Raghu is Mr. Biswas' father and Bipti's husband. Dehuti is Mr. Biswas' sister. Dehuti and Mr. Biswas are too close when they were young. They used to play together, while their other brothers are far away when they were busy in work. So their brothers' names are Prashad and Pratap. Ramchand is a confident brother-in-law and Dehuti's husband. Tara is Mr. Biswas' aunt. She is childless. Ajoda is Tara's husband, who is obsessed with his health and a wealthy man. Seeth is the most powerful and respected man in Tulsi's household. He is the husband of Padma. Chinta is Shama's sister. She is referred in the novel as C. Only in the 3rd chapter her name is revealed. Govind is a coconut seller. He marries Chinta and he works in Tulsi's fields. Let us see the other characters while we deal with the summary. The novel is of 2 parts and has 7 chapters altogether with an epilogue. This video contains the whole summary of the novel. The novel A House for Mr. Biswas, it follows the character Mr. Biswas. Mr. Biswas thinks that he had an unlucky birth in the rural Trinidad because he experiences repeated displacement and he is unsatisfied with marrying Shama Tulsi. Also, he thinks that he had an uninteresting or not exciting childhood. He had a quest for having a house for his own. The novel revolves until his death in the city of Port of Spain at his age of 46. Mr. Biswas, throughout his life, he was romantic, but he was insufficient in his life. He is prone to pride, disappointment, irritational optimism, and despair. He dreams of finding financial stability, especially to have a house of his own for his family. But when finally he buys a house that always he wanted, it turns out to be a scam. That is, the house is ill constructed and nearly uninhabitable. Also, he was unable to pay his mortgage. Mortgage is a money that is borrowed to buy a house or a flat. By the way, his health also declines. His job was also laid off from him. Then he dies in a heart attack. In the prologue section, Mr. Biswas' tale begins where it ends. That was when he was fired and when he was into debt. Debt is an amount of money that you owe to somebody, that is borrowed from somebody. Biswas is married to a large family, that is Tulsi's household. The family is relatively large. He could not manage the household. And when Mr. Biswas passed away with little more than that of the mortgaged house, that is, the house is in, on looking about Mr. Biswas' birth, he was claimed to be born at midnight, that was in the inauspicious hours, and he was born out of 6 fingers. There was a Pandit whose name is Sitaram, so he's mentioned as Pandit Sitaram. He warned that Mr. Biswas will be a lecher. Lecher meaning womanizer. Spendthrift. Spendthrift is a person who spends money without cause. And a liar. When he was young, his parents ruined his life by ordering him and discouraging him with many instructions, and he is told to be stayed away from trees and water. He receives the name Mohun, but the narrator of the novel insists on calling Mohun as Mr. Biswas even from his earliest days. Raghu is the father of Biswas, and he was a miserable sugarcane worker who buried his earnings in jars or undergrounds, and he had a superstitious belief that insisted on staying away from home whenever Biswas sneezed. The elder brothers of Biswas, that is Pratap and Prasad, they always joined their father in the cane field. Mr. Biswas was not considered, and he was too sticky and weak to work. So Mr. Biswas always accompanied his neighbor Dari because Dari needed someone to look after his new calf. When Mr. Biswas was busy gazing at a shallow stream one day, the calf wandered off and drowned. So everybody get afraid of this and they tell to Mr. Biswas' father, and the whole villagers they assembled at the lake. His father Raghu began diving for the missing animal and the boy. Raghu pulled up the dead calf and he drowned inside the lake in search of Mr. Biswas. However, Mr. Biswas were out of the lake, but unfortunately his father drowned and died inside the lake. After Raghu's death, the neighbors they started to hunt the family's garden at night in search of Raghu's buried jars that contains money. Mr. Biswas' mother, she decided to sell the land and decided to go to her sister Tara's house, that is in the town of Pagotes. In Pagotes, Mr. Biswas was fortunate to go to school where he learned to read from the authoritarian teacher named Lal, and he began to have friendship with a local boy named Alec. Alec taught him to draw letters. After his studies, he started to work with Jairam, also with Tara's brother-in-law Bandat, but they had a conflict. Later, Mr. Biswas decided to work with Alec. The work that he indulged was with painting signs. His job of sign painting once took him to Tulsi's magnificent Hanuman house that was in the town of Arvakas. In the house, there was a man named Seeth. He hired Biswas to paint signs in the Tulsi's store. And after this, Biswas fell in love with one of the Tulsi's daughter. The girl was 16-year old. She is named Shama. He wrote a love letter to Shama. Mrs. Tulsi, she received this letter, but to his surprise, she offered Shama's hand in marriage. However, soon after the wedding, he regretted for his decision, but soon he moved into an upstairs room at Hanuman House. In Hanuman House, there were dozens of family members. They were all together. At the initial stage, he finds that the relatives are in harmony. As days passed by, Biswas immediately hated his new surroundings. He did not like Shama, Shama's sister Chinta, Chinta's husband Govind, Shama's orthodox brother named Hari, and Mrs. Tulsi's two studious sons, to whom Tulsi paid special attention. To this special attention, Biswas nicknamed those two boys as the two gods. Once when Biswas spitted and threw his food onto Ovid, Ovid is a younger son of Tulsi, whom Tulsi considers as God. Biswas, he received hearty beating from Govind, and they ordered him to leave the house immediately. After his eviction, Mr. Biswas went to a remote village called the Chase. There he ran a new store where the Tulsis have purchased there. Soon after this, Shama was pregnant and they had a daughter named Savi. Biswas' business was turning sour at the Chase and he lost in his business. That led to lose all his savings. In addition to his loss, he also had a fight with Mungro. Mungro is a local stick fighting. By this time, Biswas' family has grown. He also had a son named Anand. As the family could not cherish in the remote village, the Chase, they then moved on to Green Valley, which is an estate near Arvakas. Here he started to work with Seth. Seth is the husband of Padma, who is one of Tulsi's household. Here, Biswas found his work tedious and his house ruined his life because he lived in a small tiny room. His entertainment was only reading newspaper, and this made him to dream of building his own house behind a grove of trees nearby. Biswas started to invest all his money in constructing a house from reclaimed materials with the help of a local builder named Mr. George MacLean. And when they moved in this new house, Mr. Biswas' puppy Tarzan was dead on their doorstep due to a severe lightning storm, and the severe lightning storm it torn the house into pieces. That again leaves Mr. Biswas without a home. The Tulsi's household, that is Tulsi's brother-in-law, they bought Biswas Anand back to Hanuman house where he started to recover and began to feel safe. At this point in Biswas' life, he had two new daughters named Maina and Kamla. After the recovery, Mr. Biswas, he jumped onto a bus to port of Spain, where for few days he stayed with his sister Dehuti and her husband Ramchand. The house in which they lived was a ramshackle house. Biswas then had to find a job. He found his old friend from Arvakas, where his friend was working as a news reporter. Biswas showed his studiousness in work to the editor of the reporting house, Mr. Burnett. Mr. Burnett, in the days come, he was impressed of the work that Mr. Biswas has done. He promoted Biswas as a full-time reporter. And Mr. Biswas' family agreed to move to Port of Spain, where Tulsi offered spare rooms in her vacant house for only $8 a month. Soon, Mr. Biswas was no longer to write sentimental reports, and he was assigned by the management to cover cricket matches and court cases. And the management fired Mr. Burnett, and this increases miserable days to Biswas. He started to disconnect with his family, and the family had to be connected with Tara and her husband Ajuda. Later, the family had to move at Anuman's house, and when they returned, Biswas had a fight with Seth, and the family had to leave Anuman house for an estate at Short Hills in the north of Trinidad. Mr. Biswas also kicked out of Mrs. Tulsi's house in Port of Spain. On and on, the family have to find in search of shelter. When Biswas' son Anand started to go to college, Mr. Biswas found a new job. His job was to conduct surveys for the Community Welfare Department under the beautiful Miss Logie. Miss Logie is the head of the Community Welfare Office. And at this point, the family was living with Tulsi's household. Over the brother-in-law of Biswas, he quickly took control of the family. Howard has just returned from England. He took the family attention by narrating stories about medical adventures and politics in England and Russia. One day, Mr. Biswas meets a solicitor's clerk who told Mr. Biswas about a house that he was trying to sell. And this was the same house where the protagonist died in the prologue. Mr. Biswas, he thought of buying this house where he can borrow some amount of money, that is some $4,000 from Ajuda, to make the purchase of the house. Then he moved his family into the new house. Only then he discovered that the house was not well constructed, and the solicitor's clerk had priced huge amount of money to Biswas. After this, the novel starts with the epilogue. The epilogue summarizes the last 5 years of Mr. Biswas' life. Anand and Savi, they have moved abroad for college studies. Mr. Biswas finally grew to respect Shama's rationality, and he suffered 2 heart attacks that left him hospitalized. Months later, Savi returned from university and found a job that paid far more than he never made. Mr. Biswas then died shortly in Trinidad, and in the funeral ceremony, the whole family was around him, attending his cremation, and then went back to their respective homes. The themes of this novel include independence versus belonging. In the novel Biswas, he had a quest to find independence from family and fate. He struggles enough to find a sense of belonging to a place, social status, and hierarchy. The character Biswas is obsessed with social hierarchy, and he constantly worries how he can fit onto it. He also demands for respect and attention, especially within the Tulsi family, education, work, and language. Although when Biswas was young, Pandit Sitaram, he declared that Mr. Biswas will be an unlucky child, but Biswas, he encountered that he had gained education, and that made him to succeed in his life. Oppression within Tulsi's family, Biswas feels that he was oppressed by the family members of Tulsi. Hope this video helps. If you have query, write it down. Thank you for listening.